So this is our last lecture for the series, lecture number 7, Retirement and Estate Planning. Are you ready for it? Do you have enough money stashed away so you can have a comfortable retirement? I see some of you nodding no or yes. It is very, very important. Now, I know that keeping calm about retirement is not easy, especially if you're not prepared for it. So what do? How do we do it? Again, a set of very good questions need to be asked when it comes to retirement and estate planning. When will I want to retire? My target date is 27 years from now, if government regulation doesn't change that till then. Most probably they will change. So I'm thinking loosely 30 years. So 30 years from now I have to retire. What will it be then in terms of inflation, dollar inflation? What do I need to do now? How much money I have to put aside so I can have a fairly decent living then? Will it be enough? Do I factor in any medical costs? And the reason why I talk about medical is going to be the biggest factor in your life when it comes to retirement. I know that when you're in the 60s, you don't think about it that much, but start going up to the 70s and 80s, and it's a totally different picture. I've been visiting so many people in hospitals because of my nature, with the nature of my job, and I've seen it. 70s and 80s, it's all there. And in financial circles, people warn you, in financial planning circles, they warn you that the last 5 years of your life are going to be the most expensive. The most expensive years of your life are going to be the last 5 years. So where are going to be the sources for your retirement? Again, you have to think about Social Security, pension funds, savings, IRAs, other assets such as homes, land, precious metal, cash, and so on and so forth. We already talked about 401ks, IRAs, Roth IRAs, savings, cash investments. What we haven't talked about yet is annuities. Annuities basically are insurance products that you pay. There are several ways to do this, but basically you make a contract with an insurance company that if you pay a lump sum now, based upon calculations of how much do you need to live in retirement, let's say you pay in a block of $300,000 now, the insurance company will tell you, okay, so I will pay you on a monthly basis $5,000 for the remaining of your life or for a particular duration. That's an annuity. It's a payment it's a contractual payment engaged between two parties, usually an insurance company and yourself. And that annuity can be varied to the infinity based upon specific needs, based upon regulatory environments of a particular state. It can be very, very various. So you have to kind of sit down with an insurance professional and see what works best for you. Now, another insurance thing that you really should consider is insurance for long-term medical care, or insurance for nursing home, or insurance for what is going on with this computer? For some reason it's not switching to where I want it. Yes, here you go. Long-term care is very, very, very expensive. And I think we mentioned it the other day that on average it's anywhere, if you have to go to a nursing home right now, for example, you pay anywhere between $4,000 to $6,000 for a bed. Right now, today, every month. That's on a monthly basis. So think about the future. When you will have to retire, inflation probably will depreciate the dollar purchasing value, so that would mean that you have to pay even more in the future for the same bed that today somebody has to pay $4,000 to $6,000. So we made the calculations. If you only do a merely $4,000 or $5,000, that's about $50,000 to $55,000 a year. So 1 year will cost you $50,000 to $55,000 only in nursing home care. And I'm not talking about Medicaid. I'm not talking about medical costs and anything else. It's just phenomenally expensive in our country. So you kind of have to think about those things in terms of retirement. How much they're going to cost you? Is your housing paid off? A really good rule of thumb is by the time you get to the retirement age, you have to have no debt and your house needs to be paid off. You have to have your house paid off before retirement, because you will not have the same resources, the same income in retirement as you had pre-retirement. In fact, professionals say that you kind of have to expect anywhere between 50 to 70% of your income, pre-retirement income, to be able to live on. So basically, instead of getting 100%, let's say if you did $1,000 before retirement, you will probably make about $500 to $600 to $700 in retirement only, in the combination of the resources that you have available between Social Security or pension funds or 401ks or whatnot. So you have less income in retirement than before retirement. And this is a no-no. This is a no consumer debt in retirement. And I know that it's kind of like a no-brainer, but I'm reading all these articles that seniors go into credit card debt because of various reasons, and some, again, is not of their own fault. But it's very, very catastrophic from a results perspective if you go into debt in retirement. You just don't want to do that. You have to consider your needs, and again, I said that you have to kind of consider 80% of what you used to live on. So instead of 100%, you have to think less. You will have less income, and your cost of living should be between 70 to 80% than pre-retirement. So basically, you have to save more, spend less, and live on less. That's the bottom line. And of course, you have to do it from savings, and health is going to be your biggest cost. Now, how do you do it? Well, a combination of things. You have to have faith. This is not a doomsday situation. Other people have lived, and we will live too. It's just we have to be creative and a little bit thinking ahead of our times, because we don't want to get into a dependency situation. It's so horrible. I used to do a little bit of a stint as a CNA work when I was in college, and there were professors and there were different people in the particular nursing home that I worked, and it was so devastating to see the embarrassment, perhaps, or the pain in their eyes and voices when they used to be professors and they used to be very well people and whatnot, and now they were reduced to a dependency status, and somebody else had to change their their diapers, and they had to be washed, and they had to be bathed, and they had to be, and that's okay. That was our job, and I loved it. It was one of the most beautiful time period of my life for that, because I realized this is where I'm going to be one day too. And I'm going to be so happy if some attendant person will do the same thing to me as I was able to do, I was privileged enough to do to other people. So it taught me a lot about compassion and thinking ahead that this is going to come at some point and knock on my door too. So that part was good. But it also introduced me to that dependency thing. I looked them in the eye, and they looked at you in the eye, and you could see that this was not something that they wanted to be at. And it was very, very heart-wrenching to some extent. So think about these things. Don't get scared. Have faith, and do your part. You can have a good diet if you exercise, if you have community involvement, if you perhaps even want to do some part-time work, or if you have a community involvement and a purpose for living and all that. Those can help you quite a bit. Now, with that, you will have also Medicare. And I'm not going to go too much into this, but this is very, very important. Before you are 65, a few months before, you have to sign up for Medicare. If you not necessarily because you want to draw Social Security benefits, but because the Medicare insurance thing, so you can get covered. This Medicare has 4 components, A, B, and C, and I'm not going to go a lot into these, but basically each one of them are taking care of specific needs of yours. For example, Part A covers hospital insurance, and it's usually free for most people over the age of 65. Part B is basically a medical insurance that requires a premium. And it's usually, right now, it's about $120 some per month, about $121.80 something. So Part A and B is what is considered the original Medicare as we know it. And then, of course, it covers about 50% of your medical needs. So it doesn't cover everything. This is not a free ride, if you will. It helps you. It's kind of like a safety net mechanism, but it doesn't cover everything. And of course, there are deductibles, there are co-pays, there are co-insurances, and also on the prescription side too, on the Part D, you have to do your part also on that. Now, beside these, there's Medicare Advantage plans that are private insurance basically, but it's a supplemental thing that you can buy into, and that kind of alleviates some of the pain when it comes to higher prices and whatnot. Now, Part D, prescription drugs, this is a benefit, and they are added to A and B. And of course, there's a very famous donut hole, you know what I'm talking about, and there's co-insurances and whatnot. Eligibility, if you've been living in the U.S. for 5 years, you're eligible. And of course, you have to have at least 40 quarters of work in the U.S., and you have to be 65 or older. And if you are disabled, then you can apply earlier on a disability claim. You have to check for more with the Medicare office. Now, Social Security, just a few things about Social Security. The longer you wait, the higher the benefit. Does that make sense? So officially you can retire at 62 or so, but if you retire at 62 and you get early benefits, then it's going to be less. And we'll get to a different slide where it shows you the percentages. The longer you wait to draw Social Security, the more you will get. I went on to the Social Security Administration website and I wanted to do a lot of research to see which one is the more beneficial thing. It's the same. These guys are, the people who are designing these programs, they are extremely clever and intelligent, and they run tables and actuarial tables and a lot of statistics and a lot of algorithms, and they figure it out. It doesn't make any difference if you draw early or you draw later. On average, you draw the same amount of benefits either way. Because if you draw early, you get less money. If you draw later, you get more money, but you live less. So it's just a matter of, you see, you have to kind of figure out the peculiarities of your situation when it comes to income in Social Security, and you have to educate yourself about this, because if not, it can cost you a little bit.
Your balance point on that is probably approximately 875 is for the balance point.
Yes, 875, yes. So, for example, if you retire at 62, you will get only 75% of the benefits. If you retire at 65, you get 93% of the benefits. So you have to kind of think about your health, the way you think, how strong you are. If you think that you're not going to live long, nobody can determine that, right? But you have to kind of make those calculations and kind of think about that. If you have savings and if you have a good track record in terms of finance and investing, 2 years is not going to be making a big difference if you're healthy and life is good. And then you can get 93% instead of 75% of benefits. You will also have to think about a taxation thing too, because there is a certain threshold, I think it was $35,000 or so. There's a certain threshold after which some of the benefits will be taxed. Depending on resources you have, additional resources, you kind of have to think about that part too. Now, just a couple of things about estate planning. What is estate planning? We have less than 5 minutes, and we're going to cover it really quick, and then we'll be done. But we need to think long term. For some reason, we think that if we don't have a will and if we don't have an estate plan in place, and as soon as we do it, we're going to drop dead and die. Is it true? Some people might do that if they happen to have a heart attack, but usually, on average, people don't die the moment they make a will. Or people don't die when they make a succession plan and they put a succession plan in place. So it is very, very, very important to do this. And the reason why, so all of you have heard about Prince, the very famous musician in the U.S. He's very famous for Purple Rain. It's just a ubiquitous song that's everywhere. He died 2-3 years ago, and his estate is valued north of $300 million. He did not have a will. Guess what happens now, 2 years later?
Go to the government.
Nope, they go to probate, because they go into probate. Probate is a process in which the government, which is the state or whatever, determines the validity of a claim, and they will try to disperse that estate to the legitimate heirs, or if there's no heirs, then they will make a determination of how that money should be dispersed or that estate should be liquidated. So basically, the government will tell you, or they will dispose of your assets the way they see fit, within given constraints. Of course, they can't do everything they want to, but they're trying. For most times, the government, I think, it's not evil. They try to do their best, because that's run by people too. You have to remember, government is not bad. It's not evil, period. So, but it's so much better for you or your estate or your family to disperse of those assets. What if the government says, well, let's give part of your asset to a particular charity that you don't really like? You don't have a say-so because you're dead, for once. But what if you wanted that money to go elsewhere, right? So you have to think about it. So wills, testaments, insurance, deposits of assets, you have to have a plan, because if not, everything is going to end up in a probate court. And it's very important to do this when you are not incapacitated from a mental perspective. You know what that means? Incapacitated means that you don't have your mental faculties in order. Basically, you're senile, or you have Alzheimer's or dementia or some sort of a mentally debilitating disease or condition, and this is important because your wills and your trusts can be challenged in court if they determine that or whoever the heirs or the executors determine, or the state determines, that it has been crafted while you were under that particular prognosis. So it's very, very important to do these things before you get to a point where anybody can contest anything in court. So now when you're lucid and handsome and good looking, and from a mental perspective and from whatever, you have to get a will in place and legalize it. Every state has a different system, so you have to do it according to ours here in Montana. You have to have a will, you have to make sure it's legal, and you have to do it now, so you will not have to have an issue with it later on in probate court. And that's not only the legal perspective, there's a personal perspective too. And this is very, very important, because what if you die in a matter that is very traumatic to your family, for example, and the family is very emotional because of your loss, and they can't fathom. I mean, I remember when my mom passed away at 47, she was sucked into this turbine, and it's just a horrible, horrible time, and she never had a will. And we were so distraught from an emotional perspective, you didn't even think anymore. So then, but yet we still had the responsibility of kind of figure things out and everything else, right? From a legal perspective, from a pragmatic perspective, why don't you want to give the last and the most beautiful gift to your children or to your heirs by taking care of everything? They don't have to think. They already will have something else to think about, your demise and the pain and the traumatic experience that goes with it. So by doing a will, by taking care of your estate planning before you pass on, when you're lucid, then you are helping and you're giving a tremendous amount of gift to your heirs. So it's very, very important. You have to think about this. And the first step is to make an inventory of assets right away. What do you own? Who will inherit it? How will you disperse it? You have to make sure that it's in the will in the proper legal form. Is charity and philanthropy part of this, for example? Am I going to give some money to the church, to the museums, to charities, to Boy Scouts of America, or whatever the case might be? And of course, you have to have end-of-life plans from a health perspective. What if you have a sort of a coma and you can't think but you're still alive, and then if you don't have an end-of-life will or plan, your child will feel horrible, because what do? Do I take mom and dad off the respirator? Will I keep them up? If I keep them up, the bills will increase. And there's no perspective for them to get better. You see, these are heart-wrenching things, because it has an ethical and emotional component into it. Am I going to be a horrible boy or girl, or if I take my mom or dad off the respirator? right? So think about these things in advance and make a plan and put it down in writing. I just don't want to be resuscitated if I die or if I go into a coma or whatnot. Or I want to be resuscitated just in case I can live longer. Make trusts, have executors, power of attorney, succession plans, clear directions, revocable trust, witnesses. These are so many of the components that you have to think ahead of that. Start early, find the key people, produce the documents, and consider the tax implications. Sometimes if you're lucky enough to have a huge estate over X amount of dollars, then of course there's what we call the death tax. The government comes and takes its part from the estate. Now, most of us are not in big danger because I think that the threshold is a couple $1 million or so, and even in some certain cases it's $5 million. So I don't think that most of us have an estate that's worth $5 million. But what if by the draw of the luck or whatnot, we will inherit something and we'll have $5.5 million in estate? Then automatically half of that will go to the government. But there are mechanisms, for example, you can give away gifts while you're living. Every year you could have given away $10,000 or $15,000 on one side of the parent. So if you're two people, you can give away $30,000 as of last year, every year, cash, and it's not taxable to neither side. So you can start decreasing the assets that you owe while you're in your lifetime, and there's no tax implications. But if you keep them and you give them as a lump sum in the form of a estate later on after you pass, then the government comes in and they say, hey, I took good care of you for 80 years. I educated you. I took care of you from cradle to grave. Give me my share. And it's fair to some extent. To some extent. Of course, I wouldn't say it's 40% is fair, but hey, I'm not a legislator and I can't say much about that. Okay. Last but not least, simplify. This is the name of the game. Simplify, simplify, simplify. If you simplify your life, it's going to be easier for you. It's going to be easier for everybody else after you also. And then the biggest thing that you have to remember, plan ahead. Be very intentional about it. Don't procrastinate, because procrastination is someone else's pain. It's very simple. If you don't do your job today, then you will inflict some emotional damage on someone else at some point. Because there's going to be fights or struggles and hard feelings. Hey, mom told me that I can have this set of dishes and whatnot. And no, dad told me that I can have the tractor, or whatever the case might be. And you don't want to go to that. You want to kind of take that away before. So thank you so much. This concludes our seminar, Financial Literacy Seminar. I want to thank you so much for being willing to be here for all these 7 times. And I want to thank KQLW 97.7 also for helping us out with recording and transmitting this on air. I will be available for questioning for the next 25 minutes. And thank you so much, and God bless you. Okay, I think we're off radio.